Volume 2. The Betrothed. 3 years later. Chapter 1. The saintly soul of Elizabeth shone like a shrine-dedicated lamp in our peaceful home, and Clerval, could aught ill entrench on the noble spirit of Clerval? On the coldest day of the year, the Cimetière des Rois would usually be empty save for clatterings of jackdaws perched on gravestones. But when the coldest day also marked the first day of 1792, the cemetery was crowded with families yearning for communion with the dead. Elizabeth Lavenza was distressed. She understood this to be a possibility when she'd insisted on William accompanying her to Caroline's grave, but told herself the snowy weather would act as a deterrent. She was wrong. New Year's Day was New Year's Day, no matter how frigid it might be. "Come, Dormouse." Elizabeth reached for William's hand in the carriage. She fought her rising irritation. "We won't stay long."
"No, Lisbeth. Cold."
The almost 4-year-old boy folded his arms and scowled, reminding her of Victor when she'd first met him as a child. Gold curls, strong jaw.
"But we're going to visit your mamma."
She adored William, but how stubborn he could be. He jutted his lip.
"She's not there. She's dead."
Elizabeth's chest caught. "Yes, she's dead, and it's all my fault." "There's no reasoning with him when he's like this," Henry Clerval intervened. "Let him wait in the carriage." He had agreed to accompany Elizabeth and William for the New Year's cemetery visit when Alphonse complained of exhaustion after church. Ernest had disappeared to wherever he went these days now that he'd rejoined the Frankenstein household. He'd returned from the Alps transformed from a sickly boy into a tall 15-year-old who appeared older and acted such, or attempted to. "You'll watch him then?" Elizabeth cast an eye toward the main promenade where Caroline's tomb awaited. "I won't be long." "I'd rather accompany you. Antoine can stay with William, Beata." Beata was the childhood nickname Henry had settled on her years earlier. "I'm happy to, mademoiselle," Antoine replied. The groomsman was dressed in a dark frock coat and breeches instead of livery. All that had been done away with during the Revolution of 1789, which occurred in Geneva soon after Victor's departure for Ingolstadt. Since then, the Republic had settled into an uneasy peace. Not so in France, where turmoil still reigned. "Very well," Elizabeth muttered, again fighting that conundrum of rage and guilt she'd lived with since Caroline's death. She would do anything to relieve herself of it. Once William was settled, Henry alighted from the coach holding a small bouquet of lush red roses. "You forgot these for your aunt." "Thank you." How kind Henry was, a true friend. He pointed down a path. "This way, yes?" Elizabeth nodded. Without thinking, her fingers sought out Caroline's emerald ring, which twisted on her right hand. She'd yet to have it resized since Victor's proposal. They'd marry after his return from Ingolstadt. She prayed soon. At least then she'd make amends for essentially killing Caroline. It was all her fault. Elizabeth knew it, though she'd never confessed as such to anyone, especially not Victor. That green Florentine journal she'd given him at the farewell picnic, it was a custom binding she'd commissioned. She'd insisted on purchasing it, though the shopkeeper was ill. She even warned Elizabeth as much. "I've a fever, mademoiselle. You mustn't come near me. Come back next week for your gift." "Next week will be too late," Elizabeth had pressed. "I'll be but a moment." A moment too long. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke with a headache that worsened during the day. By the end of the picnic, she'd never felt so ill. And now, well, now she was no longer ill, only cursed, or so she felt. "Once I wed Victor, I'll feel better. I know it. I'll have kept my promise to Caroline." As she and Henry strolled into the heart of the cemetery, gravel crunched beneath their boots. Denuded of leaves, the snow-covered oak trees lining the promenade looked deflated, like a court gown without panniers. Not that anyone wore these anymore. Instead, all was delicate linen tunics and long shawls. Elizabeth stared above the oaks, the cold air sharp against her cheeks. The sky was a cerulean blue that spoke of sun and heat, lazy days boating, not snow and frost. Behind them, a family argued, a husband and wife clutching an infant who was wailing. Why was it that raised voices sounded so much harsher in winter? The feuding couple stomped off, leaving the remaining families crowding the Cimetière des Rois in their separate but equal universes of loss. A young woman hooded in a nut-brown cloak limped, before vanishing into a wooded lane. The sight of her solitary figure tugged at Elizabeth. No one should be alone and mourning on New Year's Day. She gazed up at Henry, grateful for his presence. He'd truly kept his vow to Victor to keep her company. As they walked, the cerulean sky softened to grey. A fresh show of snow, so fine it glistened in the air. It muffled their footfall. Then they were there, Caroline's tomb. Snow or no, Elizabeth dropped to her knees before it. Alphonse had spared no expense on the tomb, even arranging for the famed sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon to carve a life-sized marble representation of Caroline, inspired by that oil portrait from years earlier. The statue was set on a monument base almost as tall as Elizabeth. It was so different from the small watercolour Elizabeth painted of her aunt soon after her death, which she set in a gold locket around her neck. She intended the locket for William in time. Snow cloaked Caroline's ivory statue, causing it to shimmer like an apparition. White upon white. It would be impossible to paint, Elizabeth decided. The statue lay some steps from the Frankenstein mausoleum, which housed every generation since the family's arrival in Geneva 2 centuries earlier from Darmstadt. The mausoleum was among the largest in the cemetery, an architectural mirror of the Frankenstein's influence upon the city republic. During fretful moments, Elizabeth imagined Caroline lonely away from their ancestors, but she'd come to appreciate Alphonse's decision to set her tomb apart. In this setting, surrounded by elms and oaks, it was easier to sense Caroline's serene presence. The mausoleum always seemed a clatter of individual histories clamoring for attention. Here, there was only Caroline, perfect, kind Caroline who'd loved Elizabeth like a mother. Caroline who'd been the perfect wife to Alphonse, as Elizabeth prayed she'd be one day for Victor. Marrying Victor was the least she could do after all that happened. Perhaps she wouldn't feel cursed then. Henry stepped away, affording Elizabeth privacy. The words she'd said so often and in so many ways since Caroline's death fell from her lips. "I'm so sorry," Elizabeth whispered, letting the roses fall from her arms. If only I hadn't taken ill. If only you hadn't nursed me. If only you'd survived." Elizabeth shivered despite her thick wool cloak. The roses appeared a shock of scarlet against the soft white snow. She should finish paying her respects and return to William, return home. Yet all she could recall was Caroline's face after she'd promised to marry Victor. The ecstatic relief. The peace. Elizabeth set her palms against the ground to stand. She couldn't seem to. Guilt is heavier than lead. This sounded like one of Victor's alchemical formulas. She had no idea how many seconds passed before Henry helped her to her feet. "Her death wasn't your fault, Beata." His tone was akin to those used to soothe an invalid. "Will I ever feel it's not?" "In time." Henry let out a long breath. Snow fluttered about his face. "Time will help." "But time changed everything," she choked out. "So many I love are now gone. Not only Caroline, Victor in Ingolstadt, even Justine. I loved her like a friend, and she nearly died because of me." Justine had also been afflicted with scarlet fever, but not as severely as Caroline and Elizabeth. Soon after her recovery, Justine returned home to her mother. Elizabeth was surprised. Hadn't Justine refused Madame Moritz's apology that day? The Frankensteins hadn't heard from Justine since. Henry said, "Justine's in a happier place now." Elizabeth offered an unusually harsh laugh. You make it sound as though she's passed too. I meant to say, it's good she's reunited with her family. I'm sure it was difficult for her to forgive her mother, but I'm glad she was able. You don't have to protect my feelings, Henry. I've no doubt Justine blames me for my aunt's death. I've sent notes, gone to her doorstep. She refuses to see me. Victor blames me too. Since he left for Ingolstadt, I've received a total of 6 letters in 3 years. 6! He's barely written anyone. Henry also rarely heard from Victor, save for brief, distracted letters he showed to Elizabeth. Victor seemed particularly enamored of a professor named Waldmann, who had advised him to study chemistry instead of mathematics. The two friends fell into an uneasy silence. The snow continued to fall, broken only by flickers of movement toward the cemetery gate. A line of children holding hands following a stout, squat woman. An elderly pair of women shuffling, careful not to slip on ice. That girl in the brown cloak she'd spotted before. I'm sorry to be so mournful, Elizabeth said at last. It's hard not to. Your aunt was the kindest gentlewoman I've ever met. As close to a mother as I've known. Just as she was for me. But you didn't cause her death. Henry looked about the graveyard at the thickening snow. He pushed his unruly, fawn-coloured hair from his eyes. We should leave soon. I'll hurry. William is probably fidgeting by now. Elizabeth drew from her muff a slender flask containing water from the flowers. The snow surrounding Caroline's tomb wasn't deep, but it was thick enough to obscure the lip of the glass vase set into the base. Elizabeth cleared the snow using her hands. A jag of pain. Her finger. She dropped the flask. 3 drops of red blood fell, blossoming on the snow like poppies. Blood. Her blood. The sight of it made her stomach flip. You cut yourself. Henry pressed his handkerchief against her fingertip. The linen bloomed scarlet. Elizabeth sucked in her lip, fingers stinging. Somehow the vase had cracked. She bent over it, spying something small and dark inside. Something shiny. Something curved. An acorn? To avoid cutting herself again, she scooped it out with Henry's handkerchief. A bullet, she said. She shuddered, remembering the soldiers she'd seen 3 years earlier. Mobs. Thankfully, she hadn't seen the worst of the violence, but she'd seen enough. Henry's face drained of color. We should go. It's too cold for flowers anyway. We'll place them by your aunt's portrait instead. Let me accompany you home. Perhaps there'll be a letter from Victor. Good Henry. Kind Henry. What would she have done these past 3 years without him? Elizabeth stole a glance at him. He really was handsome, though in a different way from Victor. Yes, time to leave, she agreed. William is probably restless. By then, the cemetery was emptied of everyone save that solitary female mourner with the patched brown cloak. The girl crossed the avenue beside Caroline's tomb. Elizabeth nodded out of habitual politeness as she passed. A dragged leg? A curved spine? Beneath her snow-dappled Therese hood, silver-pale hair, light grey eyes. Elizabeth turned, heart flooding with emotion. Justine? Is that you? The mourner didn't respond. Her pace evened as she continued down the promenade. Elizabeth hadn't imagined the limp, had she? The hair, the eyes? I'll go after her, Elizabeth told Henry. I don't think Justine heard me. She could apologize again, win her affection back. Henry circled. Where? I don't see anyone. He was right. The cemetery was empty. The mourning girl gone. Henry took Elizabeth's arm. It's hard to see anything in this snow. Come, it's getting heavier. No, don't look behind. You'll only get snow in your face. And so Elizabeth didn't look behind. If she had, she would have seen Justine emerge from behind an elm to approach Caroline's tomb. Justine dropped to her knees and kissed the base of Caroline's statue, ignoring the drops of blood dotting the snow. She clutched her hands beneath her chin, knuckles tight. I'm so sorry, madame, she whispered. If only I could have saved you. If only I hadn't taken ill. If only you'd survived. A moment later, Justine crossed herself. She staggered to her feet and limped away. Chapter 2. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence by inquiring into my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labours, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves. When their carriage reached the Frankensteins' home, Henry fled before Elizabeth could offer her customary invitation of a visit and a meal. "The weather. My father," he said, his words limp as wet paper. Elizabeth nodded with disappointment. She'd grown fond of his companionship, and hurried inside, clutching William's sugary hand. Anyway, time for her to hide any desires or needs, to be loving and perfect, as everyone needed her to be. Once William was settled with Sophie, Elizabeth found Alphonse in his study slumped before the fire. Like Elizabeth, he'd never ceased mourning Caroline. Unlike Elizabeth, he didn't blame himself for her passing. A pile of papers rested on the table beside him, where a tea service awaited. Both tea and cakes appeared untouched. Elizabeth hurried to his side. "Uncle, are you well?" He waved away her concerns. "A letter from Victor. It just arrived." Elizabeth's heart gave a stutter as she took the half-sheet from Alphonse. "I bid you all a loving greeting in anticipation of the coming new year. I will write anew once this round of my labour is complete. V.F." 2 sentences, that was all. Victor's handwriting looked rushed, as though he'd dashed off the letter without consideration. Small red splatters dotted the letter. Not blood, Elizabeth thought. Her fingers still stung where she'd cut it, but it had ceased bleeding. She said in a careful tone, "His studies must be heavy." "Perhaps." Alphonse's spoon clattered against the china as he stirred his tea with a desultory air. "Elizabeth, do you remember what I told him at the picnic that day?" How could she forget? "You'd said that you'd regard any interruption in your correspondence as proof he was neglecting his other duties." Alphonse offered a half-smile. "How good your memory is. Well, now you understand my concern. I'm tempted to travel to see him, but Ingolstadt is so far, and with the turmoil in France—" Elizabeth bit her lip. That bullet near Caroline's monument, the shattered vase. She wouldn't tell him. It would only add worry. Nor would she confide that she thought she'd seen Justine. He'd be saddened. He'd been particularly fond of the maid. "It is far, particularly in winter," she finally said, forcing a cheerful smile. "He did promise he'd write again soon. If he isn't home by this summer, we should travel to see him. I'll accompany you. I'm sure Ernest will too." "A good plan. Thank you, my angel." She pressed a kiss against his wrinkled cheek. "Shall we write Victor before William interrupts?" Once their letter to Victor was complete, Elizabeth crept back to her room to compose a private one. "Beloved friend," she began, "it's been so long since you've written me directly. 6 months, more. Though I am grateful for your letters to our family, I yearn for us to confide in each other as we used to. Oh, I miss you." Her hand stilled. Her guilt turned back to that rage she didn't fully understand. Fury at Victor rather than yearning. But it was more than this. In Ingolstadt, Victor's life had continued without Elizabeth's involvement, as though she didn't matter. In Geneva, Elizabeth was trapped waiting for his return, waiting to make amends for Caroline. "I have no reason to be so angry. He's busy, that's all." With this, Elizabeth continued her letter, making her words as bright as the smiles she feigned in her family's presence. She wrote to Victor of people they knew in Geneva, teas to offer philanthropy to the less fortunate, outings to concerts where she hadn't noticed the music. Since Caroline's death, society had welcomed Elizabeth in her aunt's stead. Once she married Victor, her position would be even more secured. She'd be a wife, a Frankenstein by law and before God. She'd no longer be an orphan dependent on their favor. She'd have fulfilled her promise to Caroline. Maybe then she'd be less angry, less filled with remorse. I hope my words have brought you the sense of an afternoon spent with your family at home, Elizabeth concluded. If this letter has offered a moment's respite, please write to let me know. I love you and yearn for your return. Yet as she reread her words, all she thought of was Henry's face when they'd parted at her door. How lonely he appeared with Victor gone. Henry. If only he'd stayed for a visit, she'd grown used to having him near. They could have spoken of Victor, reconstructing memories as though to recreate his presence. This would have offered more comfort than that terse letter Victor had sent, which a stranger could have written. Perhaps Victor had changed while he was in Ingolstadt. Maybe that's why he rarely wrote, not that he blamed her for the loss of his mother. But what of herself? Had she also changed? Elizabeth couldn't turn from the question. As if pulled by a thread, she rose from her desk. A standing mirror stood across the room where the light was best. She always tried to avoid the sin of vanity, but in this case she couldn't resist. Elizabeth bolted her door. She unlocked her desk drawer and took out a sketchbook she kept secret, her pencils and charcoal too. She approached the mirror and unbuttoned her gown, slipping it from her shoulders, her chemise too, until her torso was bared. She narrowed her eyes and imagined Victor viewing her on their wedding night. Once she'd gotten a good look at herself, she opened her sketchbook. She turned past the drawings she dared not share with anyone, mice caught in traps, birds victimized by cats, butterflies found with abandoned wings, glimpses of her unclad body, until she found a blank page. She sharpened her charcoal. As Elizabeth drew herself, a peculiar calmness fell across her soul. These sketches felt a compulsion, a hunger. This act of observation and recording was necessary, a ritual to quiet her turmoil, a way to view what was true, rather than the serene surface she felt compelled to present to the world. She never sketched her entire body, only details. This way, should the sketchbook ever be discovered, no one would realize the drawings were of her. Still, she was careful to always lock the sketchbook away. Her drawing quickly took shape on the page. Her breasts appeared smaller than before she'd taken ill with scarlet fever, 2 small nipples with softness about them, like a 13-year-old girl's. Her ribs protruded beneath her greyed flesh. She'd never gained back the weight she lost then. Decidedly not as pretty as she'd once been. Did she dare to completely undress? Outside of herself, she'd never seen a naked woman, not even when Caroline had given birth to William. As for the male form... Instead of imagining Victor on their wedding night, Elizabeth recalled the last time she'd seen him. It was the night before his departure for Ingolstadt, several months after Caroline's death. Victor had taken her passing especially hard. His sorrow had been such that he'd been unable to speak to anyone for days. That night, he'd come alone to Elizabeth's room after everyone else had gone to bed. "I'll be leaving early," he'd said. "Far earlier than you usually rise."
I wouldn't miss seeing you off,
she'd replied. She felt her tongue dash against her lips.
I'll wake early.
That's not what I meant, Elizabeth. I wanted to bid you farewell in private. He took a step toward her, gazing at her in a way he never had before. Then she noticed he was holding the journal she'd given him at that last picnic. It flashed green in the dusky light. Her stomach had flipped. Panic. Victor offered the journal to her with a yearning smile. "I want you to inscribe it for me, beloved. Something to remind me of you while I'm away." She wrote on the flyleaf, "I will love you until my last breath." Beneath this, she signed her name with the bravado of the guilty. Once Victor read her inscription, he embraced her as though something had changed in him, in her. There was an insecurity to his gesture, as though he was exploring what it meant to be a lover instead of a friend. She suppressed a shiver as he set his dry lips against hers. He laid on the bed beside her. Though nothing happened save some innocent caresses, She told herself Caroline's death hadn't cursed her, for she could tell she pleased him. He murmured how much he loved her, that she was his angel. Perfect. They'd marry upon his return. Once he'd said this, she wept with relief. She dared to hope their future might be happy. She even thought of their wedding night, and bang! A crash on her window like a gunshot. With this, Elizabeth came back to herself with a start. She was alone in her room, her breasts exposed while she drew. She covered herself and rushed to the window, where a tar-black shadow fluttered. A bird dangled mid-air, squawking. A jackdaw. It must have dashed itself against the glass, which miraculously hadn't cracked. Thankfully, it appeared unhurt. Once she opened the window, the bird took off in a blur of somber iridescence through the snowy garden. She shivered. The bird means nothing. She dressed herself and locked her sketchbook inside the drawer. She told herself, all is well. Victor will write soon. Victor didn't write. While Elizabeth and the Frankensteins awaited any news from Ingolstadt, snow melted into spring and tulips gave way to roses. French troops began to arrive in Geneva like they had during the Revolution of 1789. More ominously, a new instrument of state appeared in Paris to bring order. A guillotine, Ernest explained. It was still strange to have him home. Perhaps it was his time in the mountains, but Ernest considered himself Swiss rather than Genevan, which distressed the patriotic Alphonse. What's that? Elizabeth asked. Look. Ernest opened the latest Gazette de France to reveal an illustration depicting a tall framed apparatus with an angled blade, a smiling executioner displaying a severed head. Such is the French devotion to an equal society for all. They've set the guillotine in a field outside Paris to avoid attracting crowds. Alphonse frowned. I don't see how the ability to execute criminals more efficiently encourages equality in a country. Better they be banished from their motherland. That, to my mind, is punishment enough. Elizabeth did her best to make peace between them, as Caroline would want. She smiled, she soothed, she took care of William as though he was her own. She did everything but tell the truth, that she felt as though she was going to jump out of her flesh with each passing day. By the middle of September, the guillotine had been moved from the Parisian countryside to the Place du Carrousel, which was followed by the massacre of over 1,000 people in less than a week. Ernest spent hours in coffee houses debating the situation with other students. That morning, he brought home newspapers proclaiming that French troops had attacked the Duchy of Savoy with the intention of incorporating it into the French Republic. Savoy was south of Geneva. Worse, the French confiscated the Genevan artillery for their use, leaving the city republic defenseless. The news transformed Alphonse's unease into a disturbance that Elizabeth couldn't soothe. Even William sensed his father's distress and played quietly for once. We should leave Geneva, Uncle, Elizabeth urged. It's time, please. Not to Bellerive, Alphonse replied, glancing up from his pile of correspondence. Not far enough. Look at Chêne. Chêne, a village a league outside Geneva, had been recently captured by the French without a blow. Ernest challenged, The French are our allies. We should follow their lead for a more egalitarian society. Man is born free, but is everywhere in chains. Rousseau again. Elizabeth had read the philosopher at Ernest's insistence, but feared his books encouraged violence. Before Alphonse could respond, a lanky boy with a mop of sun-dusted curls appeared at the door, a messenger from the assembly. More letters, more words delivered in an urgent tone. Alphonse ordered Elizabeth and Ernest to leave his study. Let your father be, Elizabeth warned Ernest once they were alone. Ernest's eyes widened, mocking. Why? You should have more compassion for him. You're saying this because you're dependent on his favor until Victor returns, Ernest snapped. As for my father, he should have more compassion for those who rely on his position to ease their lives. And you're the one to enlighten him? For a moment, Elizabeth thought Ernest would scowl as he often did. Though he resembled Caroline in appearance, his temperament was as stormy as hers was serene. He only laughed, and all seemed set right in that moment. "Elizabeth, you forget I didn't spend my childhood here." His tone grew bitter. "My father doesn't really know me, not yet. As for my mother, I shall never truly know her." She said quickly, "I understand. I know nothing of my parents myself." She recalled so little of her life before the Frankensteins. Their conversation silenced as Alphonse emerged from his study, his shoulders taut. "I was mistaken in my complacency," he said, grave-faced. "French troops are on their way from Savoy to surround Geneva. Elizabeth, you must leave immediately with my sons. I won't accompany you."
"No, you must come," Elizabeth protested. "Please, Uncle."
"I can't, nor do I want to," Alphonse said, ignoring Ernest's glare. "Forgive an old man for insisting on remaining in his homeland." Her uncle handed her a sealed letter. She recognized it from Caroline's jewelry box. "This is where you shall take sanctuary, children. Elizabeth, your aunt intended this to be your wedding present. I think she will forgive me for giving it to you early." Alone in her room, Elizabeth broke the letter's seal.
"My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, you have wed Victor and are now a Frankenstein. As such, it is time for you to learn the truth about the family whose name you came to us bearing, the Levenzas. I must warn, what I am about to share may bring sorrow as well as joy. However, I trust in time the joy will outweigh the sorrow. You, of course, know the story of how you came to me so many years ago, how I'd yearned for a daughter of my own, and how I loved you from the moment I first laid eyes on your face. The beggar woman who served as your nursemaid confided of your noble family name, which was of an ancient lineage. She knew little of your parents, save they were deceased. I still recall the first time you met Victor. Here is a pretty gift for my Victor, I told him. But the truth was that even then you were already more than this to me. You were someone I cherished, someone who, in time, I prayed would become Victor's dearest friend and life companion. Yet though I'd embraced you as my own, I understood there was a lack in your heart from not knowing your parents. I resolved to fill it. After many letters, I received confirmation that your mother was a German noblewoman who died in the act of giving you life. As for your father, he was an Italian nobleman who plotted to obtain liberty for his native country from Austria. He was arrested soon after your birth, his property confiscated. Alas, a decade later he was discovered lifeless in his prison cell, leaving you the last of the Levenzas. After much petition, your uncle and I were able to restore a property on the shores of Como as your family inheritance. The Villa Levenza is located near where I first met you as a child. Though the villa has not been inhabited in years, the property has been maintained by loyal servants and is a place of natural beauty. It only awaits you to take possession. My darling Elizabeth, I pray you and Victor shall find much joy there. With greatest affection and devotion, Caroline Frankenstein. I'm an heiress, Elizabeth whispered to herself. She truly had no idea. She folded the letter away, her mind a dark jangle of surprise. Within this confusion, a shocking thought arose, stunning in its disloyalty. Would she have agreed to marry Victor had she known she was an heiress? Of course I would have, she reassured. I've always loved him. And then, I must. I promised Caroline. For a moment, she felt as though she'd retch. She didn't. Instead, she left her room to fetch William, smiling as she always did. Come, Dormouse. We're going on an adventure. Shall we pack?
Chapter 3. Through my father's exertions, a part of the inheritance of Elizabeth had been restored to her by the Austrian government.
A small possession on the shores of Como belonged to her. It was agreed that we should proceed to Villa Lavenza. They left the following morning. The journey to the Villa Lavenza would take Elizabeth, William, and Sophie 3 days. Long days that included a ferry to Evian and several coaches to Lake Como. Days in which Alphonse did not want Elizabeth to travel without an escort due to the turmoil. Ernest refused to accompany them, to Alphonse's displeasure. "Can't you see I can't leave Geneva?" Ernest pleaded, his eyes feverish with excitement. "This is a new world, a better world." "A world where many will die," Elizabeth fretted, though she didn't say such. It would have upset William. Anyway, Ernest was only 15. What protection could he truly offer? But someone else volunteered to take Ernest's place, Henry Clerval. Elizabeth had rarely seen him since their New Year's cemetery visit 9 months earlier. He claimed to be busy with his father's shop. She'd accepted his excuses with a graceful smile. In private, she felt abandoned. But once Henry learned she'd be leaving Geneva, he immediately appeared at the Frankenstein's door, prepared for the journey. "I will accompany you to Lake Como," he said. "I insist." Elizabeth's heart leapt at his presence. She truly missed him. Alas, he proved to be a somber travel companion. Though he and Elizabeth did not discuss the French invasion of Geneva, it seemed an invisible weight on his spirit. Usually Henry was the placid one, the one who found the good in every situation, the one who enthused over beauty and nature and literature. Henry's mood did not shift even as they drew closer to Lake Como. Nothing attracted a cursory remark from him, not even the sight of cascading waterfalls or glaciers veined with colour. Elizabeth suspected a reason for his preoccupation besides revolution. Victor. Henry was thinking of the promise he'd made to protect Elizabeth. He'd left his father to honour this vow. She could imagine Monsieur Clerval's disapproval, especially during such a tumultuous time. Well, Elizabeth supposed she liked Henry's company more than he liked hers. "We've missed you these months," she ventured in a careful tone. By then they were on to the next to last leg of their journey, and William was napping on her lap. "But we understood you had needs of your own. I hope your silence isn't because of your father's displeasure." She snuck a glance at him, curious how he'd take her words. "It's not that, Beata." Henry's voice was so low that Elizabeth had to lean in. His hair bore a faint citrus smell, like sunlight. "My father wants me to become his partner. In time, I'm to take over his business." "Ah, I suspected he may have intended such." His silence wasn't because of Elizabeth after all. She was surprised by relief, though she knew it was selfish of her. She resisted the urge to take his hand. "I'm sorry," she wanted to say. "You must be so disappointed." She said nothing. Knowing Henry, he'd feel shamed by her pity. She knew he'd hoped his father would allow him at least a year of university before he settled into trade. He wanted to study languages, not business. He once told her and Victor, "The world is so big and wide. Understanding languages is the best way to understand different cultures." Before Caroline's death, the three of them had imagined bright futures where Elizabeth would make art, Victor uncover the mysteries of mathematics, and Henry study other cultures. An enchanted circle of 3. Henry stared out into the vista, letting his hand trail from the open carriage as though to gather sunshine. The September day was warm enough that they had no need for a canopy. He said at last, "I've another reason for accompanying you, besides revolutions and promises. A reason I will tell you, by the by. I shan't speak of it at this time, for look how lovely the day is. So beautiful, so unaware of the world's troubles." With this, they fell into a new silence, one that felt scarcely less awkward than the first. They remained so for many leagues, even after William woke and they stopped to switch to a hired carriage outside Mont San Giorgio. However, Elizabeth's melancholy faded once they approached the Villa Lavenza, and the scenery grew more exquisite. The road twisted and narrowed as it sliced through the mountain. The sun winked through the trees. Vineyards rose beside them, heavy with fruit nearing harvest. A curl of excitement, anticipation rose from her stomach. With this villa, this home, she would at last possess tangible evidence of her parents' lives, a life separate from the Frankensteins. Before Caroline, what would she find when they arrived?
"We're there soon, I hope?" Sophie asked. "Please say yes, Monsieur Clerval."
Suspension coach or no, the unpaved road was bumpy and prone to induce vertigo.
"Now?"
William cried. "Almost," Henry replied, examining the map. His spirit also seemed lighter.
"Where's the lake?"
Elizabeth asked, sitting up straight. Henry pointed at the map. "Over there, see? The Villa Lavenza is near the village of Leno."
Leno.
The word tripped off Elizabeth's tongue, languorous in its syllables. Alphonse had described these details, but she'd been too stunned by the news of her inheritance, as well as panicked by their sudden departure.
"How close are we?"
Henry traced a curling shape on the map with his forefinger. Elizabeth had never noticed before that he bit his nails. "See the upside-down Y? That's Lake Como. Over here is Leno. It's one of those villages along the north perimeter." He looked up from the map, and here we are, if I'm correct. There it was, the entire lake revealed like a bride made brazen on her wedding night. Even William gasped. Lake Como was a blue basin of water wider than Elizabeth's eyes could contain, broader than life. Over her right shoulder, a thin island interrupted the pristine span. Where the southern expanse of the lake met the horizon, a distant mountain range rose. A single white cloud floated above their heads, the sole discord marring the sky. The coach jutted to a stop. William and Sophie spilled out from it, Henry too. Elizabeth's heart raced, reminding her of when she was a child awaiting Christmas.
"Is this real? Am I awake? Am I dreaming?"
"Awake," Henry said, his eyes sparkling, "though it appears a dream. Look, there's your villa." And then Elizabeth could no longer deny the truth of what she was experiencing. "Oh," she breathed. She'd expected to find something humble, something akin to their maison de campagne in Bellerive. Not this. The Villa Lavenza was a 3-story ochre-colored horizontal box crowned by a grey slate roof with matching shutters and balconies. 2 shallow gables broke the expanse of the roof like eyes peering out at the sea. The villa's windows were symmetrical, as were its chimneys, from which a thin drift of smoke emerged. Before Henry could offer his hand, Elizabeth climbed down from the carriage. She discovered herself inside a long, formal garden delineated by 2 banks of cypresses pruned like pyramids. A long reflecting pond was set between the cypresses, within which a family of nearly grown ducklings and their mother floated placidly. Beyond it, an apple orchard. The villa's gardens were framed by banks of mountains stretching toward the heavens. All this, mine. Elizabeth could scarcely breathe. Henry wrapped his hand around her elbow as though he feared startling her. She leaned into his touch, welcoming his warmth. "Come, Beata. Your household awaits." Inside the villa's foyer, Elizabeth found Sophie already seated on a fine mahogany bench that appeared carved centuries earlier. The maid's grey eyes were as wide as Elizabeth's. William lay in her lap, sucking his thumb from exhaustion. How long had Elizabeth remained in the garden? Long enough for Sophie and William to find their way inside, and for the small household that made up the Villa Lavenza to arrange themselves by height. None were dressed in livery, but that was to be expected, Elizabeth decided. Revolution had affected even these far corners. First was a grizzled lank of a man who appeared a decade younger than Alphonse. He bowed. "Martin Fritzen," he informed Elizabeth in careful German-accented French. A golden-colored hound stood by his side, tail wagging like a whip. "I maintain the grounds. I'm also qualified as a groom, if you've need." The housekeeper was next, a thick-waisted, voluptuous woman with stubborn grey curls escaping her white lawn mob cap. "Signora Giulia," Elizabeth was told in Italian. Your uncle wrote of your arrival. I cook and oversee the staff." As for the housekeeping staff, it was comprised of 2 skinny girls, one fair-haired and the other dark, Rosa and Ella. They giggled as they bobbed curtsies. "This is their first placement away from home," Signora Giulia explained. "They are children, really, but they will work hard. You must forgive their awkwardness. You have need of a maid to help you dress? I would recommend Ella. She's very clever." "I've no need, thank you. I've brought a maid with me." "The red-headed girl?" Signora Giulia gave a dubious shrug in Sophie's direction. Sophie cuddled William and yawned. "Sophie is very capable," Elizabeth interjected. Another shrug. "As you wish, signorina. We are isolated here, and it is difficult to find help, so we do as we must. Only I remained here all these years, along with Martin. You must understand it was surprising to learn the villa was to be inhabited again after so many years with your father gone." "You were acquainted with my father?" How strange to refer to her father as someone with a history, a life. Signora Giulia nodded. "And your mother?" This Elizabeth had not expected. Her hands clenched like she'd received a blow. "You knew my mother?" Signora Giulia replied. "Yes, though I did not wait on your parents. I worked in the kitchen then. Your mother was particularly kind." "What did she look like?" Elizabeth yearned to ask. "Did she resemble me?" She didn't trust herself to speak without emotion. Henry took her hand, gentle as ever. "We can speak with Signora Giulia later, Beata. We should view the rest of the house, don't you think? Soon the sun will be too low to see it properly. I know I am too impatient to wait." He offered a bow. "Milady, may I escort you about your villa?" Elizabeth's cheeks lifted into a wide grin. "Of course, my lord." "Not a lord. Imagine me your knight. I am here as your liege, if you will." Her heart leapt at his words. She could never imagine Victor being so fanciful. "He's inspired by this place, not me." Henry pointed toward the foyer's widest archway. "I suspect this leads to the rest of the public rooms. I have no idea what they're called in a villa. The reception room? The ballroom? The gallery? To call it a drawing room seems an insult." Elizabeth laughed, her chest releasing. She dismissed the servants and gave William a kiss before passing him back to Sophie. She reached for Henry's arm. "Shall we, my liege?" As Henry predicted, the archway led into a room so grand that it must have been a ballroom at one time in its history. A crystal-hung chandelier glittered rainbows from the dying sun. The walls were frescoed in colors faded by years of sunlight, the paintings so skillfully done that they appeared three-dimensional. These frescoes extended toward the ceiling, where they dissolved into a pastel display of sun-drenched clouds and gold-curled cherubs. Paint mimicked faux windows framing views of fantastical landscapes and mythological creatures. "I'm really here. I'm not dreaming." "You don't remember living here?" Henry asked. She shook her head. "I was only a baby." For a moment she nearly began to tell him again the story of her parents from Caroline's letter, as though to restore them to life in this place where they'd loved each other. She couldn't, not yet. Instead, Elizabeth's eyes drank in the villa's beauty like water on a parched day. Her fingers itched for her brushes. If only she'd brought her watercolor kit. They departed Geneva so quickly that she'd neglected to pack them. She'd have to remember the best she could. "But Henry is here. He won't forget." Elizabeth turned in a circle. The frescoes surrounding the room were interrupted by a wide marble fireplace. Above the fireplace, the artist had painted 2 cherubs holding a winged crest. Henry raised his head and pointed. "This must be the heraldic shield of the Levenzes." Elizabeth found she could only nod, for she didn't trust herself to speak. "I may be the last of the Levenzes, but I can bring a new family here, a new history." As though conjuring the future, she imagined 2 children, a boy and a girl, chasing each other through the ballroom, their laughter rising toward the frescoed ceiling like Victor and herself. Their children, a life apart from Geneva, where she wouldn't blame herself for the death of Caroline. "Are you tired, Beata?" Henry asked. "It's been a long day. Forgive me, I was so eager to see everything that I forgot myself." "No," she said. "No, I want to see my house." She giggled. My house. How easily the words sprang to her lips. She must see every corner before it grew too dark. Another giggle rose like water bubbling from the earth. She broke into a trot, running from room to room, much as William would. Henry's boots clattered along the marble floors as he chased her. "Wait for me! You're too swift. I want to take my time taking in everything." "As do I," she laughed. "We can linger tomorrow. Hurry!" They approached a set of wide French doors, which opened onto a terrace overlooking Lake Como. To the right of the doors, a staircase led upstairs to more bedrooms than Elizabeth had patience to count. The largest one had walls painted in warm yellows, as though from the time of ancient Rome. It held a desk, a gold-lacquered screen, and the largest bed, also curtained in yellow. This must be my room, Elizabeth decided. Yes, there was Sophie unpacking in the adjoining antechamber. Before she could address Sophie, Henry tugged at Elizabeth's arm. They raced down the stairs, out toward the terrace that overlooked the lake, where the sun had sunk low, staining the water a brilliant scarlet. Below the terrace laid an ivy-covered boathouse, which was also covered in frescoes. It was here Elizabeth and Henry finally came to a rest, all thoughts of Geneva and revolution and loss far from their minds. They looked out toward the mountains, the lake, the sky beyond. Henry's mouth shifted as though to conjure words, but he said nothing. She understood. She mirrored his silence, her heart full. This was worth bearing the loss of a father and a mother. This house, this beauty, wasn't it? Again, she tried to imagine the children she might have with Victor. She found she couldn't. She was too aware of the weight of Henry's hand against hers. When had she grasped it? "Beata," he said, turning toward her. "Elizabeth, I must—" Her stomach pulled with something she refused to identify. Her mouth grew dry. How well his hand fit in hers. No. Yet she took a step closer. Behind them, the eager swish of skirts, the rustle of steps. Someone was approaching the boathouse. Elizabeth released Henry's hand as though she'd been caught stealing. "There you are, signorina," Signora Giulia called, puffing for air. Her over-generous bosom spilled from her black gown. Elizabeth averted her eyes. "I've been looking all over for you." More huffing. "Dinner is served, but it will be only you and the gentleman, yes?" She bowed to Henry. "Forgive me, signore. I did not acknowledge you with the respect you deserve. Signore Frankenstein wrote that the signorina was to marry his son, but I did not expect your arrival too." "Monsieur Clerval isn't my intended," Elizabeth admitted, her face hot. "He is like family to the Frankensteins." By the time the second glass of wine was poured at dinner, Elizabeth forgot her embarrassment before Signora Giulia. She raised her goblet to Henry. "To family," she said, "and the love that binds." Love? Where had that come from? A flush crept along her neck. "To family," Henry repeated, downing the remainder of the wine in a considered gulp. He set down the glass. How delicate the crystal stem appeared against his hands, gnawed nails or no. He ran his forefinger around the rim. "So, what shall you do next with your villa?" Elizabeth let her wineglass linger against her lips. Your villa. She still wasn't accustomed. "There's not much I need to do. From the looks of it, Signora Giulia and her staff are quite capable. I only wish I'd convinced Uncle Alphonse to accompany us." "He'll be safe. Your uncle is too good a man to be threatened," Henry assured. Yet Elizabeth sensed there was something bothering Henry, something he'd yet to speak of. "A reason I will tell you by the by," he'd said in the carriage. She'd forgotten in the excitement of their arrival. She shouldn't press him, not yet. He'd already sacrificed so much to accompany her. "I hope you're right," she replied. "It's good Ernest remained with him." "And what of you?" "Well, I suppose I'll stay here with William until my uncle writes for our return." "That's not what I meant. Will you live here?" "With Victor after you marry him." Though Henry didn't say it, the implication was impossible to ignore. She felt another rush of heat on her neck. "I don't know. Perhaps a summer house. I can't imagine leaving my uncle alone in Geneva." "Yet a family needs a home of their own. Children need room." Perhaps it was the wine, but now she couldn't sense those children with Victor she'd envisioned earlier. This troubled her. Still, she forced herself to answer Henry. "It's not practical. Lake Como is so far from Geneva." "True. But this house—" Henry swept his arms toward the frescoes, the candelabra, the sea beyond. "How can you abandon all this beauty?" Elizabeth's fingertips relaxed on the stem of her wineglass. Beauty was a far easier conversation subject. She drained the remainder of her wine. "I have something I must confess." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Consider me your confessor, then." She giggled, unable to suppress the sound as it rose up her throat. "You would say such a thing. About beauty, that is." Another giggle. Henry refilled his wineglass. "Beauty is no laughing matter." "I know. This is where you differ from our Victor." Elizabeth spoke quickly without thinking. "You know how Victor talks about the beauty of science, of logic?" Henry nodded seriously. "Yes, but I don't follow how that relates to this beautiful villa." "It's this. He'd never understand this house. The nature surrounding it, the beauty." "That's not true," Henry said, unusually passionate. "He sees beauty. I've heard him enthuse over flowers, sunsets, nature. But he's not seeing the true beauty of it as you and I would." True beauty? You and I? She was being too familiar. Still, she plunged on, attempting to make order of her thoughts. "He's always analyzing his experiences according to the principles of science. For example, tonight's sunset. Wasn't it glorious? Victor would say that it's nothing more than light plus the movement of the heavens and the ability of our brains to perceive what our eyes have witnessed, not beauty. Do you understand the difference, Henry?" "Yes, but it makes me happy that you're here with me, witnessing the beauty of this place. Now I'll never forget my first visit here. I won't recall it as something created by science. I'll recall it as a miracle, a thing of beauty." Whether it was the wine or the setting, Elizabeth continued vocalizing ideas that made her feel vulnerable. How beauty made her feel, the inspiration that led to her interest in art, the beauty she yearned to remember. As she spoke, she found herself staring at Henry. He really was handsome. Different from Victor, though her betrothed was striking too, with his dark curls and intense eyes. Henry was like a poem. Victor was a storm. "There's more," she tested, "to beauty, that is." An uneasy giggle. "It's a secret I haven't told anyone. I have this unyielding curiosity to uncover what lies beneath the surface of beauty." "Such as?" She drew a deep breath. "I've been drawing animals. Birds, insects. No one's seen them. I mean, I don't show anyone. I've a secret sketchbook." Henry leaned in. "For anatomical subjects?" "Yes, but not like the ones in Victor's books," she answered quickly, the wine tripping her tongue. "I only draw them when I find these subjects unmoving." A breath. "Without life." "Deceased?" She flushed. "Well, I also draw myself. Studies in the mirror. The parts I can see, that is." She wouldn't confess these parts were unclothed. "I began the sketchbook after my aunt's passing." Henry's eyebrows raised. How vulnerable she felt. "I've shocked you," she said. After a long moment he replied,
You're not as people believe, are you, Elizabeth Lavenza? You hide your sorrow behind your smile. You seek comfort by examining the shadows. I don't know about that. She'd never thought of her sketchbook that way. But maybe... It's because of Caroline, she said all of a sudden. Because of something I did. Oh, it's so awful, I can't say it. Henry leaned in. Whatever it is, it can't be that bad. I can't. You'll think less of me. That's impossible, Henry said. I esteem you, Elizabeth, very highly. A gulp of wine before he continued. As for your secret sketches, I'm sure they're not as peculiar as you believe. Artists have drawn such studies for centuries. Somehow his reassurance loosened her chest. She forgot about Caroline, her guilt, even her anger. Now that I'm here, she said, I think I know why I became so obsessed with these drawings. Somehow, seeing where my parents once lived, well, perhaps I can put these strange obsessions behind me. Do you understand, Henry? I do understand. I'm glad. You should be thinking of life, not death. And beauty, she added, grasping his hand anew. Yes, and beauty. Henry's face clouded. Elizabeth, I have a secret I must tell you myself. I'm glad I'm not the only one. A bright smile as she reached for more wine. Was this what you tried to tell me in the carriage? The reason you accompanied us? I've been waiting for you to tell me. He released her hand to drain the remainder of his wine. Once he set down his glass, Elizabeth detected a tremor in his grasp. Perhaps her confession had shocked him after all. It's nothing, really. Only that it's been a long day. He abruptly rose from the dining table. I will see you in the morning. When Elizabeth returned to her room, how amazing this remained. She discovered Sophie had set out her night rail, her hairbrush, and a bowl of water scented with rosemary and lavender to wash herself. The fire had been stirred, emitting a steady warmth to cut the cool mountain night. The golden-haired hound who'd greeted Elizabeth upon her arrival lay across the bed. He offered a slow wag of his tail before returning to sleep. However, instead of going to bed, all Elizabeth wanted was to make art. Her conversation with Henry had spurred this desire, though how peculiarly he'd behaved when he'd bid her good night. But she'd been peculiar too. It had felt so intimate to dine alone with him. She confided too much, but he wasn't shocked. She felt freed. Instead of death, she'd paint life, her new life. I'm drunk, she realized with a start. That's why I confessed so much. A knock on the door. Who's there? Her door creaked open. A small girl, Ella, the dark-haired one. She appeared the same age Justine had been when she arrived at the Frankensteins. Despite the late hour, the girl's deep brown eyes were wide and awake, anxious to please. How sweet she was. Signorina, I heard your steps, she said in Italian. I thought I should see if you needed anything else. Elizabeth fingered the locket of Caroline dangling from her neck. Perhaps one thing. I will get it, whatever it is. Elizabeth told her. In lieu of a sketch pad and watercolors, Ella located paper and ink with a quill in the library downstairs. Will this do, Signorina? Yes. Though paper and ink weren't watercolors, they'd fulfill Elizabeth's needs. Elizabeth set to work, though her head ached slightly from all the wine. Instead of drawing from observation, as she usually did, she'd draw from imagination. She began by sketching a man's face in the center of the page. Victor's face, as he was before Caroline's death, when they were young and unscathed by loss. Her lips spread into an unconscious smile as she drew the dark beauty of his eyes, their flash when he was laughing or arguing. I do love him, more than anyone else. She recalled Victor in the rain, Victor and the tree blasted by lightning, Victor kissing her goodbye after she inscribed that green journal. Don't think of that journal. Let it go.
Her pen lines on the page appeared warm and soft beneath the candlelight, glowing. But then something took over Elizabeth's hand, something she couldn't describe. As she drew, Victor's face transformed into something different, something base. His hair turned black and luxuriant against his forehead, akin to the wild mane of a beast. An aspect of cruelty in his brow, scarred with age or something else, something unnatural. His eyes gleamed with madness, his lips black and thin, vengeful, demonic. Elizabeth dropped the quill, splattering ink. "That's not Victor I've drawn." A peculiar terror tripped along her spine, one she couldn't quantify. Yet as disturbing as the sketch was, she couldn't look away from it. She told herself the sketch didn't signify anything. By the drawing of it, she'd exorcised something from within herself, something monstrous. Her guilt over Caroline. That sense of being cursed she'd tried so hard to ignore. She'd burn the sketch in the morning. Whatever was inside her that had led to the sketch, well, she wouldn't think of that. You seek comfort by examining the shadows. Henry was right. She reached for the vial of laudanum she kept by her bedside since Caroline's death. Peace in an elixir, she called it. 5 drops later, she fell into a dreamless slumber as the clock downstairs struck midnight. Her last conscious thought was of Henry. There had been a secret he wanted to tell her. "I'll ask him again in the morning," she decided. "He'll tell me then."